Conversation is going already, and now we have the opportunity here from Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexis Pauline Gumbs, and I am so honored and excited to be at the Festival of Faiths this year. And this set of opening remarks is actually a dive into some pieces from my book, Archive, which we're going to be activating oracle style. I was so fascinated by the theme for this panel, the ghosts and growing edges of Black faith. And I realized that there's some haunted possibilities in what I've been thinking about a Black futuristic and Afro-feminist faith this entire time. So I am a Black feminist love evangelist. That means that Black feminism is my spiritual practice, my ancestral practice, what I believe in to help us evolve together on this planet peacefully. And Archive is a forward-looking, backward-looking archive that thinks about what is the set of artifacts of Black life that our far, far, far in the future beings might find on this planet. We're going to use it oracle style. So that means there's some interaction from you in a particular kind of way. And when I think about the oracle, I think about it in the tradition of how my mother used to open her Bible and like close her eyes and put her finger on a verse. And that would be the verse that would help her through whatever it was that she was going through at that time. Now, of course, my book is not the Bible, but it also thinks about apocalypse, and it also has been with me for a minute. And so for you to prepare to participate in the oracle, we only need to do 3 things. First thing is to dedicate your participation here with us in this conversation to someone who's not with you physically, not with us digitally for this event, but who is part of the reason that you would show up for a conversation on the ghosts and growing edges of Black faith. Maybe it's someone, like I named my mother, who has influenced your faith practice. Maybe it's someone who's part of your faith community. It can be someone who's living now. It can be someone who lived before. It can be someone who is older than you or younger than you. The only real stipulation is it's not someone who's sitting right next to you. So you're spiritually connecting to someone who's part of the reason that you're here. And we can use my mom as an example, Pauline McKenzie, who trusted her intuition enough to open her sacred text and find the words she needed. Okay, so probably several people came to mind. Choose one. And the other thing that's important for the oracle is for you to think about, what is the question? What is the challenge that you bring to this conversation? It's not necessarily an intellectual question about trajectories of Black faith, though it could be related to that. It really could be what's showing up for you right now. What's haunting you? What are the ghosts and contradictions that are coming up for you when you think about your own faith or your accountability to Black communities of faith, Black possibilities of life, Black life mattering? And so just think about what that area of growth or question might be for you. I think the question that I'm in right now about the ghosts and growing edges of my own Black faith is really, how do I draw deep into my ancestral traditions, but also believe in a future that's beyond anything that we've seen? That's what I'm working through at this time. So that's just one example. And then the last thing that we need for an oracle is some way for it to be arbitrary. And so for that reason, you'll choose a number. Choose a number between 1 and 5 that for whatever reason you associate with this question, breakthrough, challenge, inquiry that you are in, and that'll be your number. Did you find it? I think you found it. Okay, so I have 5 small passages, and I'm going to read them to you. Of course, they're all reflections that I think are relevant to this topic from the perspective of the far future, looking back at what we left behind. But the one with the number that you chose, may that be a helpful meditation for the breakthrough that you're having. If you chose number 1, this is for you. They called them the air people, and they had their own mythology. They repeated the story of Igbo landing, but they said it so fast and airy, a lot of the children thought it was egrets landing. And they danced all the crane dances, remembering their wings. The air people sang the memories of the people who could fly. But they got their designation from being of air, not always in the air. It was the way the air moved through them that was strange or necessary, depending on who you asked. All those centuries of holding breath, policing the smell of breath, keeping a contract with death without honoring the pre-existing one with life, made the air people necessary for us. Beautiful and filled with light. Sometimes when you saw them, you thought you were seeing ghosts, but that was because the ancestors took immediately to the open and more open passageways of their songs, their porous limbs, their bodies that didn't seem to need to hold on to anything for long. They went to their natural extreme, and like a dream, you would meet them and remember everything and leave surrounded by whispered messages from your own dead and gone. You can take a deep breath anytime you want. If you chose number 2, this is for you. Soon, she was shaped like a ghost. Had it always been so? She had noticed that in crowded places, people always seemed to find her to be the root of least resistance. There was space where she was standing. She was space for other people's journeys. No one could see all there was to her. It made her feel small. She poked her elbows out and broadened her shoulders. She wished she had a retractable fan that popped out of her vertebrae like a dinosaur. She wished she had huge angel wings to slap the faces of the unseeing everyone. Nobody thought she was such a big deal. Or wherever she was, there was space, and ancestors came through. They were drawn to her like they had been drawn to all the shores, and like water, they began to shape the stone of her back into sand. She recognized the stardust. She breathed deeper to feel the moving. It didn't take long, only eternity, for the evidence in her side abdominals to show the work of breath, the depth of working. Her movements became dance for landing light, her offering to the heaviness of heaven. She cultivated fluid, nuanced hips to stretch the follow-through of being. Her bones decided not to know their limits. The space around her shone with beckoned peace. And if you chose 3, this is for you. Remember that the whole planet was ocean. Everywhere you've been, that desert valley was the bottom of the deep where something sentient used to swim. And every grain of sand and mineral and currently growing tree is breathing in the ghost of ocean, the infinite face of the deep. How do you think you know how to breathe and be pulled by the moon and the ocean, she'll be back soon. And if you chose 4, this is for you. There is compelled, and then there is compelled. That was the other time we had gotten to the edge of everything. War had become the question impossible to answer, and then the empty appeared with their swallowing want. We didn't know. You have to know that we were shedding ourselves. You have to know that we felt alien in our hearts. You have to know that we already felt it. That never enoughness gnawing at our spirits. This is the only way we could have ignored the prophets and our own knowing for so long. You have to know how deeply we had given up to trust ghosts to take you away. We lied and told ourselves that maybe a cross was a better place. And then we nailed ourselves to crosses here. I don't have to tell you, but we were wrong. And this is the last one, if you chose 5. This is how you prepare for a haunted planet. On the scale of the galaxy, they will call it a ghost town. You go to the city of the dancing funerals and the decorated graves, and you listen. You walk around in the populated air and thicken your knowing. You breathe the backlogged water of the left for dead and smile a painted smile. Some people will tell you it's about sea level, but the sea doesn't have to level with you. It rises, runs at you, floods your footing. So those people are right. The bones of the drowned remain. Some people will tell you it's the exotic influence of the French, to which I say yes, something like that. It's that breathing funk surrounding every word. It's the throat forever trying not to gag. Some people will tell you it is an Afro-Indigenous holding pattern, a pact saying, as long as you don't get it, we will stay here, hanging, moss-like in the lingering trees. Thank you so much, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs. There was all the evidence there of a brilliant professor of English and poet and scholar of African American studies and women and gender studies, all there in that. There was so much. It was so dense. Each short piece. I mean, we could sit here and unpack the layers, throughout the conversation. We just simply don't have the time for it. I want to ask a couple of things in what you said. Early on, you described yourself as a Black feminist, and another place, a Black feminist queer love evangelist, and say that is my spiritual practice. Talk to me a little bit about that. What does that mean? What does that look like? And particularly in a time of so much heightened anti-Blackness, anti-Black violence, anti-Black death, right? What does it mean to be a Black feminist love evangelist as spiritual practice in the face of so much anti-Blackness?
Thank you for that question. What I mean when I say that Black feminism is my spiritual practice and that I'm a love evangelist is that I really believe that salvation, the sense of salvation that I believe in my gut and in my body and beyond my body, comes through the practices that I first learned under the name Black feminism, which is the intersectionality that some of you all have spoken about before, which is the understanding that it is our role to make
a world that is loving and inclusive and transformed by love in every iteration. And so I really didn't realize that that was a form of evangelism until I was getting trained in my community in Durham to have a public access TV show. And I noticed the only other people who were there with me to have public access TV shows were evangelists. It was like Christian evangelists, Hebrew Israelites were there, like the people who cared enough to be like, whatever it is, if it's sidewalk chalk, if it's public access TV, like we are sending a message, we have some good news that we're sharing with the community. And I was like, oh, okay, Black feminism is my good news. It was a clarifying moment, and that's when I added the word evangelist. Also the fact that, you know, as my partner who is a PK and a theologian and a faith leader in their own right says I'm an everyday Pentecostal. Like, you know, I am a very spirited person, so I catch the spirit and scream out loud in all kinds of contexts where other people would be like, this is not the time to be screaming. I had to hold myself back here in the studio, just not screaming and carrying on from the inspiration that we've already experienced. So I say that to say that as you just underlined, and certainly as this decision around Rittenhouse underlines, there's so much destruction that we face. There's so much accountability for practices that are out of alignment with our environment, with the capacity for the earth to hold us and support us through this time. And when I think about a shift within our species that could make it possible to live in harmony with each other, but also in harmony with what makes our lives possible, what makes our breathing possible, I think there's not a separation between the loving action, the critique, the creativity that I see in the Black feminist tradition and those practices that we must cultivate in order to turn the reality of I can't breathe into something like a chorus of presence. There's an intellectual tradition, there's an activist tradition that's called Black feminism, but my experience of it is that it requires infinite faith to practice that way. It requires so much faith to believe in a world envisioned by Black women. And when I think about, you know, core sacred texts of my Black feminism, I'm thinking about Combahee River Collective Statement. So those are Black, lesbian, feminist, socialist women. To be honest about the fact that on all sides, they're being silenced, discounted, oppressed, living in a community in Boston where in the first 3 months of the year, 12 Black women are murdered, and they have to respond to the question of why. Why is it that we die and there's not a community response? The work that is such a precedent that we call upon when we think about Breonna Taylor, and we think about the unfortunately innumerable deaths that we see before us. I think about the Combahee River Collective, young women at that time who are now my elders and teachers, who couldn't even show up at the protest with their signs that said, 6 Black women, why did they die? Because another Black woman had already been killed before they could get to the place for the protest. So they had to cross it out and put 7 in that moment. When I think about what it takes to continue a principled visionary practice, to say that the world can be different, and to decide that your days are going to be filled with the practice of that difference, that's not simply pragmatic. That's not something that can happen without a deep faith. And so, as a Black feminist, I'm not simply doing what I think makes the most sense, though I do think it makes the most sense. I'm not simply doing what I think will relieve some of the pressure on my community, though I do think that what Black feminists do creates so much space for our community. I am believing in the evidence of things not seen. And it is also the case that, my love for the Black feminist tradition, the way that I think about it, is connected with and influenced by ancestral reverence practices of the Black diaspora. It's influenced by Orisha practice in particular, because for me, when you say Fannie Lou Hamer was a historical figure, civil rights warrior, an actual person. But when I say the name Fannie Lou Hamer, and when my little nieces say Hamer was one of my niece's first words. I was very proud of that. That is actually an energetic portal. Like divine energy flows through the name Fannie Lou Hamer. And so when I, as a scholar, go visit the Amistad archives in New Orleans where Fannie Lou Hamer's papers are kept, that is a pilgrimage. Similar to the pilgrimage that Fannie Lou Hamer herself took when she went to Charleston to the ports to open the ledgers to actually touch the markings and names of the enslaved people who came in through that port. It's an archival practice, but it's also a spiritual practice. And so Fannie Lou Hamer, as I teach about her through generations of my family and community, is a person, but also a force of nature and a portal through which infinite possibility comes. And there is just nothing but faith and love and reverence that can really describe what I mean when I say the name Fannie Lou Hamer. And of course, there are many other names. So that's how I would explain why it makes sense to me to say that Black feminism is my spiritual practice and that I am a Black feminist love evangelist all day, every day, at all times, and in all things, and in all places.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was a beautiful explanation. I appreciate it. We will unpack that further, I'm sure, on the other side in our discussion.